Hello, children. It's Grandma Carla with more of Henry and Ribsy. And we are on Chapter 5, Ramona and the PTA. Henry Huggins and Scooter McCarthy were riding home on their bicycles one day after school, early in September. Ribsy, who always waited for Henry under the fir tree in the schoolyard, was riding in the box Henry had tied on the back fender of his bicycle. "You going salmon fishing this weekend?" asked Scooter, steering his bicycle through a pile of autumn leaves in the gutter. "I don't know. Dad hasn't said anything about it," answered Henry. "My dad took me down to the Umtucka River last Saturday," said Scooter. "Catch anything?" asked Henry, trying to keep his excitement out of his voice. If salmon were biting on the Umtucka, maybe his father would go fishing next Saturday. "Well, I didn't exactly catch anything," said Scooter. "How do you mean, not exactly?" Henry asked. "I thought I had a bite once, but I didn't exactly land the fish," said Scooter. "But I bet I get one the next time." The two boys pedaled along Klickitat Street. Henry was hoping his father would go fishing on Saturday. He would almost surely get to go, because he had kept Ribsy out of trouble, at least the kind of trouble the neighbors might complain about. Of course, there had been a couple of close calls, but Henry had lived up to his side of the bargain, and now he had nothing to worry about. "So long," called Scooter when the boys came to the Huggins house. "So long." Henry rode up the driveway and parked his bicycle in the garage. The back door was locked, so he found the key under the doormat and let himself in. Beside the refrigerator, he found a note from his mother that said, "Have gone to PTA meeting. Don't eat all the weenies. Mother." Henry took 2 weenies, which he shared with Ribsy. While Henry was eating his weenie and thinking about catching a salmon, the doorbell rang. When Henry went to the door, he found Beezus and her little sister Ramona standing on the front porch licking ice cream cones. Ramona, who carried a square blue lunchbox in one hand, was having trouble managing her cone with the other. Her chin and the bib of her overalls were smeared with chocolate ice cream. "Hello, Henry," said Beezus. "Can you come over to my house and play checkers?" "Sure, that's a keen idea," answered Henry. "I bet I can beat you." Checkers was one of his favorite games, and Beezus was a good player. She didn't take all day to make the move the way some girls did. Ribsy looked hungrily at the ice cream cones. He knew Henry always saved the last bite of the cone for him. Maybe the girls would give him a bite too. Ribsy swallowed and wagged his tail. "Go away," Henry said to him. "You can't have any of their ice cream." Ribsy made a whimpering noise. "What's Ramona carrying a lunchbox for?" Henry asked. "She doesn't go to school." "It's not a lunchbox," said Ramona, as a little river of ice cream dribbled off her chin. "It is too a lunchbox," said Henry. Beezus ran her tongue all the way around her ice cream cone. "Ramona's pretending it's a camera," she exclaimed. "How can she pretend that a lunchbox is a camera?" Henry wanted to know. A lunchbox for a camera? What a dumb idea. "Oh, she has lots of imagination," said Beezus. "Daddy says she has too much." "I'm going to take your picture," announced Ramona, and she held one end of the lunchbox against her stomach. The other end she pointed at Henry. "Ramona, look out for your ice cream cone," Beezus warned. "You're tipping it." That was just what Ribsy was waiting for. With one sweep of his long pink tongue, he knocked Ramona's ice cream cone to the porch. In 3 greedy licks, the ice cream was gone. Then the cone crunched between his teeth. Ramona let out a scream of rage. "Look what you've done, you old dog," said Henry crossly. He looked around to see if any of the neighbors were watching. He didn't want people to say that he had a dog that stole ice cream from little children. Ribsy gave the porch a couple of licks to make sure that he had not missed any ice cream. Ramona stopped screaming and started to hit Ribsy with the lunchbox. Beezus grabbed her little sister with one hand and held her own cone out of Ribsy's reach with the other. "I told you to be careful," she scolded. "I want my ice cream cone," howled Ramona. "Well, it's gone now," said Beezus. Looking guilty, Ribsy slunk down the steps. He turned his back to Henry and the girls and began to gnaw an old bone in the corner of the yard. "I want my ice cream cone!" shrieked Ramona. "Well, you can't have mine. I licked it all the way around." Beezus bit off the top of her cone and sucked out the melting ice cream. "Anyway, you were getting most of yours on your chin." "I was not," howled Ramona. "I'll buy you another one," said Henry. Anything to keep Ramona quiet so that he and Beezus could get started on their checker game. Besides, since his dog had taken the cone, he guessed he really owed her another one. Now, with her grubby fist, Ramona scrubbed at the tears that had rolled down into the ice cream on her chin. "Oh, all right." Henry decided he might as well get it over with. "Wait a sec." He went into the house where he took a dime out of the marble sack in his dresser drawer. Then Henry returned to the porch and he saw Ramona walking across the yard with her lunchbox in her hand. She stopped, opened the box, and laid it on the grass. Then she ran over to Ribsy, grabbed the bone between his paws, and put it in the lunchbox. "There," she said as she snapped the lunchbox shut. Ribsy looked surprised. "Woof," he said. "Hey," said Henry, "you can't do that." "Ramona, you give Ribsy his bone this minute," ordered Beezus. "No," said Ramona. Ribsy sniffed at the lunchbox. Then he looked hopefully at Ramona and wagged his tail. "That's a camera," Henry reminded Ramona. "You can't put a bone in a camera." "Now it's a lunchbox," said Ramona. "Ramona, give Ribsy his bone," coaxed Beezus. "Who ever heard of carrying a dirty old bone in a lunchbox?" "I have a sandwich in my lunchbox," Ramona was firm. "I'm going to eat it." "Oh dear, now she's pretending the bone is a sandwich," said Beezus apologetically. "I don't suppose there's anything we can do about it. Maybe Mother has a bone Ribsy could have." Henry had trouble keeping up with Ramona's thinking. At least she was quiet, and that was something. Ribsy's got lots of old bones buried around. He can dig up another one. Come on, let's go to the store and get her the ice cream cone and get it over with. I want to play checkers. Ribsy, however, did not want another bone. He wanted the bone that Ramona had snatched. Sniffing at the lunchbox, he trotted at Ramona's heels all the way to Glenwood School, which was across the street from the store where Henry and Beezus planned to buy the ice cream cone. "I guess all these cars are parked here because of the PTA meeting," Henry remarked as they took a shortcut across the playground. "Did your mother go?" "No, not this time." Beezus took a Kleenex out of her pocket and tried to scrub some of the chocolate ice cream off of Ramona's chin. "Mother said she was too tired after watching Ramona all day." "I want some," announced Ramona. "Some what?" asked Beezus. "Some PTA," said Ramona firmly. "You can't have any PTA." Henry didn't see how one little girl could have so many dumb ideas. "It's the Parent-Teacher Association. Just a bunch of ladies talking. Come on, we'll get you an ice cream cone." Ramona stopped by the jungle gym on the playground. "I want some PTA!" she shrieked. "But Ramona," protested Beezus, "how can you have any PTA? Like Henry said, it's just a bunch of ladies talking in the school auditorium and the 7th grade singing some songs for them." "It is not," sobbed Ramona. "I want some now." What's she talking about anyway? Henry was disgusted. All he wanted was a game of checkers, and now it looked like he was going to have to stand around all afternoon arguing with a little kid about the PTA. "I don't know what she means." Beezus sounded worried. "Come on, Ramona." Still clutching the lunchbox, Ramona threw her arms around one of the pipes on the jungle gym and screamed. Ribsy put his paw on the lunchbox. Ramona snatched it away from him. "Go away," she cried. "I want some PTA." Ribsy gave a short bark. "I like PTA," sobbed Ramona, and with her lunchbox in one hand, she began to climb the jungle gym to get out of Ribsy's reach. "You've got to find out," Ribsy told Beezus. "If you don't, she'll just sit here and yowl." "I know it." Beezus sounded tired. "What do you want to do with the PTA, Ramona?" "Eat it!" shrieked Ramona as she climbed higher on the jungle gym. How can you eat PTA? I told you PTA is just a bunch of ladies talking. Henry kicked at the pebble in disgust. Wait a minute. Now I know what she means, exclaimed Beezus. She thinks we're spelling something in front of her. How do you mean? Asked Henry. Well, at home, when we talk about something to eat that she's not supposed to have, we spell it. Here, Beezus lowered her voice to a whisper, like C-O-K-E and C-A-N-D-Y. She thinks we're spelling something we don't want her to have. That's why she wants it. So here, let's look at some pictures of poor Ramona. Okay, so here's some pictures. There is Ribsy riding in the bike. And then here is a picture of poor Ribsy after Ramona took his bone and stuck it in a lunchbox. Poor Ribsy. Of course, he did eat her ice cream cone. And there's Ribsy following Ramona down the road, looking for his bone in her lunchbox. Okay, so now let's continue. Oh, for Pete's sake, leave it to Ramona. Henry could see he was not going to get to play checkers that day. Well, now, what are we going to do? Beezus kept her voice to a whisper. Let's go across the street to the store and get her some cookies or something and tell her it's PTA. That's a good idea. Henry thought that for a girl, Beezus was pretty sensible. Ribsy started to follow Henry and Beezus to the store. Then he looked back at Ramona, sobbing on top of the jungle gym with the lunchbox still in her hand, and decided to stay near his bone. Henry did not call Ribsy because he knew that dogs were not allowed in food stores. Henry and Beezus looked around the store for something that cost a dime that they could tell Ramona was PTA. This was not easy to do because Ramona was familiar with cookies, popsicles, and peanuts. They finally decided on a small bag of potato chips because Beezus was sure Ramona did not know potato chips by name and because they wouldn't drip. When Henry and Beezus started back to the school grounds, they saw that Ribsy had his paws on the first rung of the jungle gym. Woof, he said, and looked hungrily at the lunchbox. Henry also noticed two women looking at Ribsy and Ramona. One of the women was Mrs. Weiser, a friend of his mother's. She pointed to Ribsy and then to Ramona. Now what, thought Henry, hurrying across the street. He hoped Ribsy wasn't in trouble, not just before the fishing trip. Miss Weiser was saying, "Look at that poor little thing. She's frightened out of her wits." "I think it's simply outrageous the way dogs are allowed to run loose in the schoolyard," said the other woman. "I wonder if we dare try to pull him away so that she can climb down." "I'd be afraid to go near him," said Miss Weiser. "I know the dog. He belongs to the Huggins boy, and I understand he's dangerous. He bit the garbage man a week ago or so." The Huggins boy looked at Beezus and sighed. All he wanted to do was play checkers, just one little old game of checkers. And now look at what had happened. How was he ever going to explain to Mrs. Weiser? And now that Mrs. Weiser thought Ribsy had chased Ramona up on the jungle gym, she would tell everybody what a dangerous dog he was. And that meant more trouble. It probably meant that his father would not take him fishing. "Come on, Beezus," said Henry. "Let's try to tell her." "Oh, there you are, Henry Huggins," said Mrs. Weiser. "Does your mother know your dog is loose on the school grounds?" "No, Miss Weiser," said Henry. "I thought she didn't," interrupted Mrs. Weiser. "My little sister isn't afraid of the dog," said Beezus quickly. Ramona, who had stopped crying to listen, let out a howl. Mrs. Weiser and the other woman looked at each other and nodded. "Woof," said Ribsy again. "Henry, you hold your dog and I'll try to get her down," said Mrs. Weiser. Henry took hold of Ribsy's collar. He wondered if Mrs. Weiser would climb the jungle gym. He hoped so. "But she's got," he started to say. "Don't be frightened, dear," Mrs. Weiser called to Ramona. We won't let the doggy hurt you." "Come on down, sweetheart," coaxed the other woman. Just then, the 7th grade burst out of the school building. Several boys began to play a noisy game of catch. Ribsy barked excitedly. "Hi, we've been singing for the PTA," said one of the boys as he ran past Henry. "I want some," howled Ramona. Ribsy grew more excited. He strained at his collar and managed to get his paws on the lower rung of the jungle gym again. "This is outrageous," said Mrs. Weiser. "I'm going to report this dog to the principal." "But she's got his bone," said Henry desperately. Ramona and Ribsy and the boys playing catch made so much noise that the two women did not hear Henry. "I think the principal should call the pound and have this dog taken away," remarked the second woman as Mrs. Weiser started toward the building. "But he has a license," protested Henry, wishing Ribsy would not bark so much. "What's the old garbage hound up to now?" one of the boys shouted as he ran off to play catch. "You shut up," Henry yelled after the boy, who was a friend of Scooter's. "He isn't a garbage hound." The doors of the school opened, and the mothers who had attended the PTA meeting poured out of the building. There was such a crowd that Mrs. Weiser was unable to enter. "Quick, get her down," Henry begged Beezus. If only they could get Ramona down and go home before Mrs. Weiser got back. "Ramona, here's your PTA," said Beezus, waving the bag of potato chips. "Come down and get it." "No," said Ramona. "Ramona Geraldine Quimbley, you come down this instant," ordered Beezus. "You come down or you can't have any PTA. Can't you climb up and get her?" Henry was desperate. What if Mrs. Mullen, the principal, really did call the pound? Beezus started up the jungle gym. "You just wait, Ramona. I'm going to tell Mother on you." Ramona began to shriek all over again. This excited Ribsy, who barked harder than ever, and attracted the attention of some of the mothers, who walked over to the jungle gym to see what the commotion was about. "Shut up, Ribsy," ordered Henry. "Can't you see the trouble you're getting into?" "How can I get her down?" Beezus asked. "I can't carry her down, and if I pry her loose, she might fall." "Why, the little girl is afraid of the dog," one of the mothers said. "No, she isn't," Henry spoke up, but no one paid any attention to him. They were all looking at Ramona. "She's so frightened she's crying," someone said. "Look at her little face all streaked with tears." "And chocolate ice cream," thought Henry. "I think it's a shame a little girl can't play on the school grounds without being annoyed by a dog," said another mother. "My dog isn't annoying her, she's annoying him." Henry tried to explain the situation to the mother nearest him, but she looked at him as if she did not believe he was telling the truth. "Maybe we should discuss this at the next PTA meeting," someone suggested. "Next meeting? We better do something now," said another mother. "It's the Huggins dog. One of my neighbors says that she had a terrible time with him because he sits and waits for her cat to come out of the house so that he can chase it up a tree." Henry wished he and Ribsy could just disappear. Now all of the mothers in the whole school would think Ribsy was awful. "Do you think we should call the police?" someone asked. "Oh, I wouldn't do that," said one of the mothers. "I know that little Ramona Quimbley. She's a perfect terror." Henry felt better. At least he had one friend in the crowd. "Well, really," said another mother, "just because the poor little thing is too young to have established acceptable behavior patterns doesn't mean that we have to let her be terrified by that dog." Henry did not know what the lady meant, but he felt it didn't sound very good for Ribsy. "I think we should call the pound," someone said. "You see how frightened she is." "Why, Henry," it was Mrs. Huggins, "what on earth is happening?" "His dog chased that little girl up on the jungle gym and won't let her come down," explained one of the women before Henry could open his mouth. Mrs. Huggins glanced at Ramona and then looked sympathetically at Henry. "He's not a vicious dog," she told the woman. "Mom, he didn't chase her, honest," said Henry. Then Mrs. Weiser, followed by Mrs. Mullins, the principal, pushed her way through the crowd of mothers. "There's the dog," Miss Weiser said, pointing at Ribsy. "Miss Mullen," thought Henry, "now I suppose I'll really catch it. Miss Mullen was nice, but when she said something, she meant it." Miss Mullen was tall and gray-haired. When she spoke, other people listened. "Hello, Henry, what's the trouble?" she asked pleasantly. The other woman stopped talking. Feeling uneasy, Henry looked around all of the mothers. He licked his lips and began, "Well, it looks like my dog chased Ramona up the jungle gym, but he really didn't." Henry gulped and went on, "She took his bone away from him and put it in her lunchbox, and he just wants his bone, that's all." Henry decided it was not necessary to tell about the ice cream cone. And here is a picture of Ramona up on top of the jungle gym with all of the mothers standing around feeling so sorry for Ramona and thinking that Ribsy was such a ferocious dog to have chased her up there. "That's right, Miss Mullins," said Beezus from the middle of the jungle gym. "I have a sandwich in my lunchbox," screamed Ramona. "But the child was obviously frightened," said Miss Weiser. "She was crying as if her little heart would break." "She was crying before she climbed up here," said Beezus. "I'm sure Ribsy wouldn't hurt anyone," said Miss Mullen. Henry was surprised to learn that the principal knew his dog's name. Miss Mullen smiled. "We all know Ribsy very well at Glenwood School," she said. "He meets Henry under the fir tree every day after school. I've been watching him from my office window for a long time, and he was never annoyed. He has never annoyed any of the children. In fact, he is usually good-natured." Then Miss Mullen looked at Ramona. "You may come down now," she said, pleasantly but firmly. Ramona scowled, but she climbed down. "Now, give Ribsy his bone," said Miss Mullen. Ramona looked sulky as she unfastened the lunchbox and handed Ribsy his bone. He took it in his mouth and looked at Henry as if to say, "Can't we go home now?" The crowd of mothers, some looking a little embarrassed, began to drift away. "Thank you, Miss Mullen," said Miss Huggins. "Gee, thanks, Miss Mullen," said Henry gratefully. "I didn't know what I was going to do. They were going to send Ribsy to the pound." Miss Mullen smiled. "That's all right, Henry. I understand. I have 3 dogs of my own at home, you know." "You do?" Henry was astounded. Miss Mullen with 3 dogs? He had never thought of her as having any life outside of Glenwood School at all. But 3 dogs! As the principal went back into the building, Beezus took a Kleenex box out of her pocket and held it to Ramona's nose. "Now blow," she said. Ramona blew. "It really wasn't Ribsy's fault," Beezus said to Mrs. Huggins. Henry's mother smiled. "I understand." Then Beezus handed her little sister the potato chips. "Here's your PTA," she said crossly. "I hope you're satisfied." Miss Weiser, however, didn't give up easily. "I know you're fond of the dog," she said to Mrs. Huggins, "but he really did frighten the child." Then she squatted down on her heels so that she could look into Ramona's face. "Did the doggie frighten you, dear?" she asked. "No," said Ramona, staring at Miss Weiser, and then she squatted down on her heels, too. Henry thought this made Mrs. Weiser look very silly. Ramona stuffed another potato chip into her mouth as Mrs. Weiser hastily stood up. "I like PTA," announced Ramona. "I bet you do," said Henry. "Come on, Beezus. If we hurry, maybe we'll have time for 1 game of checkers before dinner." And then, because he knew his fishing trip was safe, Henry began to sing, "Wolfie's dog food is the best." Beezus joined him on the second line, and together they sang, "Contains more meat than all the rest." And here is Mrs. Weiser getting down on level with dear little Ramona, and Ramona getting down on her knees too so that she could copy Mrs. Weiser. And that is the end of chapter 5. What a mess. I'm glad they got it all sorted out. This is Grandma Carla, and I love you.